Well, next we have Phil Conran and Vicky Cooper for directors with 360 Environmental. So if we can bring them up on the screen. Thank you very much. And just as a quick introduction, bio for Phil and Vicky. Phil Conran has specialist knowledge of waste legislation and is a recognised expert on producer responsibility. He was a key industry figure in the development of the UK packaging and waste electrical and electronic equipment regulations and sat on the government's advisory bodies for both. Until 2008, he led recycling and legislative development at one of the UK's largest waste and recycling companies, Biffa Waste Services. And since then, he has provided consultancy services through 360 Environmental, specialising in compliance support to businesses on a wide range of waste legislation. Vicky is an expert across a range of waste disciplines. Having formerly managed waste collection and processing facilities, she is able to combine practical hands-on experience with extensive subject knowledge on key regulatory requirements. In particular, Vicky has dealt with a large number of environmental permits and associated planning that have required lengthy and detailed involvement with enforcement bodies and local authorities. So welcome to you both there in UK, and thank you very much for joining us, and over to you, Phil.
So my colleague Vicky will start and I'll take over.
Okay, obviously with the United Kingdom being part of Europe, waste management in the United Kingdom is very much influenced by European directives. Mass burn incinerators in the late 90s were really widespread closure because of the EU emissions controls. We then had the Waste Framework Directive, which required all member states to write a waste management plan, and included in that it also brought the waste disposal hierarchy in. We then had Landfill Directive, which required reduction of organic household waste to landfill. Sorry, you call it residential. Sorry, we've got household in there. We then had European Renewable Energy Directive, which brought the anaerobic digestion in. Extended producer responsibility for packaging, WEEE and batteries. And then from next year, from the 1st of January 2015, we've got to source segregate our households into the recycling in different houses. So we've got to actually bring separated recyclables into households, residential. In response to the European directives, the UK government brought in recycling targets in the late 90s, early 200s, initially starting at 7% in 1997, and then increasing that to 25% recovery in 2000. We didn't meet that, and we then extended that to 2005. We then brought in landfill targets, a reduction of organic waste to landfill, starting at 75% in 2010, dropping to 35% in 2020. We then have the European producer responsibility brought into the UK for batteries, WEEE and packaging, and then to actually influence some of the decisions made in Europe and to actually deliver what was Europe required of us, we brought in Landfill Tax and renewable energy support. Pass to Phil.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. We are, as I say, first of all, we've got this issue with devolved governments in that we're getting increasing diversity between, or divergence between the different parts of the UK. We have the circular economy as a long-term strategic driver, but at the moment, I think as with many parts of certainly Europe, we're struggling to see how this turns into reality. The government has invested through the provision of private finance initiative to create large infrastructure projects, and they've withdrawn that on the assumption that they're now going to be meeting future targets. However, the UK has got a problem in certainly England and Scotland at the moment, in that whilst we've had good growth in recycling, we're now flatlining. And we have this EU target for 2020 of 50% that we are wondering whether we're actually going to meet. The UK waste economy has certain benefits, and one of those is that as an island we have clear national borders, and therefore anything that's imposed by government you can control fairly easily in terms of waste movement. We only have one UK landfill tax rate, and that has been applied very successfully. We have common European diversion drivers, so common legislation that applies across the whole UK despite the devolved governments. And we have a national renewable energy support, which you'll see in a minute is very important. However, the increasing divergence that we have between the different devolved governments is seeing a stumbling in some areas and a driving ambition in others, and it's becoming more fragmented. So strong ambition in Scotland and Wales, very little ambition in England, and a bit of ambition in Northern Ireland. The other problem, or one of the other problems we have, is that waste collection and disposal is managed at a local level. And because it's managed at a local level, we have 277 different collection authorities who all decide that they can do things better than everyone else. And we have a very, very diverse and fragmented waste collection and recycling policy. We have two levels, basically two tiers of local authority management. One looks after collection, one looks after disposal. And that does make it very difficult to achieve a national coordinated picture. You can see on this slide, this shows the landfill tax that's been used, and the purple line shows the rate of landfill tax, which has been increasing by £8 a year for the last few years and is now set at a ceiling of £80 a tonne. And then you can see the total tonnage and how that's fallen over the years, and how that decline has accelerated as the rate of landfill tax has gone up. And you can see that's been applied fairly evenly both to residential waste and to industrial and commercial ICI waste, although the ICI waste tends to get more affected by things like economic recession. But landfill tax has been a very strong driver in terms of changing habits, and especially with ICI waste has been very effective in increasing the amount of recycling. The majority of diversion has been achieved through recycling growth, and as Vicky mentioned at the beginning, we closed a lot of our mass burn facilities, but those have over the last few years started to develop, a slow development, because in the early to mid-2000s there was a lot of resistance caused by a very strong lobbying by the environmental lobbyists that you see there, and it's only now that we're beginning to see that growth. But what we've also seen is a renewable energy policy that's been driven by government, which has seen the growth of anaerobic digestion in particular, and a very strong growth in the amount of food waste collected direct from residential properties. Just to look at some recycling statistics, this is for England as a whole. The line at the top is the total amount of residential waste that's produced in England, and you can see that has actually been in decline over the last few years. And this is one of the key drivers of European policy, is to try and decouple waste growth from the economy, and that certainly seems to be happening. And what we've seen is the amount going to landfill, the blue line, has declined strongly. We've seen fairly strong growth in the green line, the amount of recycling and composting, and only recently have we seen relative growth in the mass burn side. And what we found is that we haven't really seen mass burn development and mass burn capacity see a reduction in recycling. So overall, that hasn't really impacted. And if we look at London, obviously our largest urban conurbation, you can see we've had very strong growth in mass burn, and even there, the amount of recycling has steadily grown. So despite a big increase in mass burn, we've continued with that recycling growth. The majority of recycling has been grown right from the very beginning through source-separated diversion. We'll talk a bit in a minute about dirty MRFs, and those were tried in the early parts of the 2000s, late 90s, and they never really worked. So all of this diversion has come through source-separated collection. And that's more recently been added to by the addition of source-separated food collection, and most local authorities now have a source-separated fruit collection. That obviously has somewhere to go, it has to go somewhere, and what we've seen as part of the government's drive to create more renewable energy, there's been a lot of development of anaerobic digestion plants, and that is eligible for renewable energy incentives that the government provides as a green energy. However, it does have problems, and using the digestate is, again, a common problem around the world. As far as residual garbage processing is concerned, we've seen again a significant increase in recent years with the incinerators, as I previously mentioned, but we do still have a huge problem in siting due to public perception, and we increasingly now have a problem getting finance for these high capital cost mass burn facilities, and that's been further undermined in recent years by the export of refuse-derived fuel, which would obviously normally feed UK plants, but is now going to facilities in Europe, including Netherlands, which I think we'll hear about from in Herman's presentation. But you can see this year we're expecting to do about 2.4 million tonnes of what's called refuse-derived fuel being exported to European mass burn facilities. We have a history of MBTs and dirty MRFs. They developed, as I say, in the late 90s, early 2000s. However, the quality of the material that was recovered was never particularly high, and effectively these have now been turned into facilities for extraction of organics. But even there we have problems because the organics that you get from them are such poor quality that once they've been through the energy process, there's nothing you can then do with the digestate. And as one very large operator said to me the other day, anybody who now puts one of these into development is a basket case. So they do have their problems. European targets are increasing. We've got pressure from Europe to extend the amount of material that we recycle. We've got our domestic recycling targets, our residential recycling targets increasing from 50 to 70% by 2030. The producer responsibility targets on packaging rising up to 80% by 2030, a ban on some materials being landfilled, and a reduction in food waste. And this is the first time that we've seen a target for prevention of waste rather than just for the recycling of waste. So we have some very ambitious targets coming in there from Europe. Sorry, I should have brought these up when we did them. And so I'm realising well over time, and I do apologise, Peter, but a summary position, most of our diversion has been achieved through increased source separation, and a lot of that has been driven by landfill tax. Most of the focus so far has been on residential waste, but increasingly now IC&I waste is also being tackled through European requirements. Most food waste is now collected separately, feeding the AD plants that are developing as a result of renewable energy. MBT growth has been extremely limited because of output markets, and we now have a stagnating recycling growth problem that raises challenges for the UK in terms of meeting this EU ambition you've just seen.